My parents texted me a single line saying, "Do not come because only elites are invited." I did not beg or argue. I stayed home in silence just like they wanted. But at 8:17 at night, my phone began buzzing with panic instead of apologies. Their prestigious guests had started asking where I was. And my parents realized that the truth had arrived at the party before I did. My name is Natalie Sanders. And if there is one thing I have mastered in my 34 years of life, it is the art of disappearing before I am asked to leave. I was standing in the center of my studio apartment when the vibration of my phone cut through the silence. It was a notification from the family group chat, a digital space where I usually existed as a silent observer rather than a participant. I picked up the device and read the message from my mother, Lorraine. The preview on the lock screen told me everything I needed to know, but I unlocked the phone anyway, perhaps out of a masochistic need to see the cruelty in high definition. The text message was brief, clinically precise, and devoid of any maternal warmth. It read simply, "Do not come. Only elites are invited. Please do not make things awkward." I stared at the glowing letters. I did not feel the sting of tears or the heat of anger. Instead, I felt a familiar, hollow resignation. It was the same feeling I had when I was 7 years old, and they forgot to pick me up from soccer practice because Sloan had a dance recital. It was the same feeling I had when I was 22 and graduated with honors, only to have my father ask why I did not pursue a more lucrative degree. I was the rough draft that never made it to the final print. I was the error in the code of their perfect family algorithm. I placed the phone face down on my kitchen counter. The apartment was quiet. It was small, functional, and undeniably mine. There were no marble floors here, no crystal chandeliers, just stacks of blueprints on the dining table and the smell of old coffee. I told myself that this was fine. I told myself that I was used to being cropped out of the frame. My parents were hosting the gala of the season to celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary, an event they had been planning for 6 months. They called it a celebration of love, but everyone knew it was a networking event disguised as a party, and clearly, my presence would disrupt the aesthetic. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city skyline. I should have left it alone. I should have ordered takeout, watched a documentary, and gone to bed. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I picked up my phone again and opened Instagram. I told myself I would not look, but my thumb hovered over Sloane's icon. My sister, the golden child, the woman who had never known a day of exclusion in her life. Her profile picture was a professional headshot, perfect and polished. The ring around her icon was glowing, indicating a new story. I tapped it. The video filled my screen. It was a panning shot of the venue, accompanied by soft jazz music and the clinking of expensive glassware. The caption read, "The night begins. Hashtag Sanders Anniversary. Hashtag Elite Only." I ignored the caption. I ignored the flash of Sloane's diamond earrings and the blur of my mother's custom gown. My eyes locked onto the background. I knew those arches. I knew the specific tensile strength of the steel beams supporting that glass ceiling. I knew the history of the moisture damage in the north corner that had nearly condemned the building 3 years ago. They were at the Blackwell Conservatory. A cold, ironic laugh escaped my throat. Of course they chose the Blackwell. To them, it was just a prestigious venue, a beautifully restored botanical garden that screamed old money and sophistication. They saw the polished brass and the rare orchids. They did not see the rot that had been scraped away. They did not see the structural reinforcements hidden behind the plaster. And they certainly did not see me. To my parents, the Blackwell Conservatory was a stage. To me, it was 3 years of my life. It was sleepless nights, arguments with contractors, and endless soil reports. I knew that building better than I knew my own mother. I knew where the drafts were. I knew which floorboards would creak if you stepped on them with enough weight. I set the phone down, feeling a strange mixture of pride and bitterness. They were celebrating their exclusion of me inside a building that would not be standing without me. I went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water. I watched the clock on the microwave. 8:15. The speeches would be starting soon. My father would talk about legacy. My mother would talk about sacrifice. Sloane would smile and look beautiful. Then, at 8:17, the phone buzzed again. It was not a text this time. It was a call. The screen flashed the name. Sloane. I frowned. Sloane never called. She texted, usually with demands or passive-aggressive reminders, but she never called, especially not from a party where she was the center of attention. I swiped to answer and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello? Sloane?" I said, keeping my voice steady. "Natalie." Sloane's voice was sharp, cutting through the background noise. The ambient sound was loud. I could hear a string quartet playing Vivaldi and the low hum of 100 conversations. But there was something else in her voice. Panic, unadulterated, unscripted panic. "Where are you?" she demanded. "I am at home," I said, leaning against the counter, like I was told to be. There was a pause, filled with the sound of rustling fabric, as if she was turning away from someone. "You need to tell me what is going on," she hissed. "I have no idea what you are talking about," I replied calmly. "Mom told me not to come. She said it was for elites only. So I am here, being non-elite in my pajamas." "Stop it," Sloane snapped. "This is not funny. People are asking what? Asking where you are." "Natalie." She lowered her voice, but the intensity remained. "It is not just the usual crowd. It is the guests of honor. The director of the Heritage Foundation just asked Dad why you were not at the head table. Dad tried to laugh it off, saying you were under the weather. But then someone else asked, and then another person." I stood up straighter. This did not make sense. My parents had spent decades perfecting the narrative that I was the unremarkable child, the one who dabbled in things that did not matter. Why would the director of the Heritage Foundation care about the location of the family disappointment? Then Sloane dropped the bomb that made the temperature in my apartment drop 10 degrees. "They are reading an article." "Natalie." "What?" I asked. "A man. I think he is from the city council, is holding up his tablet. He is showing people an article. It was published 10 minutes ago." I felt a prickle of unease on the back of my neck. "What article?" "It has your picture," Sloane said, her voice trembling. "A huge picture of you. And it is not just him. I see 3 other people looking at their phones. Graham just looked at me like I murdered someone. They are looking at the article, and then they are looking around the room for you." My mind raced. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second and tapped the email icon. I had not checked my work email since I left the office on Friday. I scrolled past the spam and the newsletters until I saw it. A notification from my boss at Northbridge Civic Studio. It was a calendar invite, marked for tonight. The subject line was simply, "Embargo lifted." I clicked on the attachment. It was a press release. My heart hammered against my ribs. I read the headline, and suddenly, the air in the room felt different. It was no longer the stale air of a lonely Friday night. It was the charged air of a storm about to break. "Natalie?" Sloane shouted in my ear. "Are you still there? What did you do?" I did not answer her. I looked at the date on the press release. It had been scheduled for weeks, locked under a strict embargo until 8 o'clock tonight. I had forgotten, or rather, I had assumed it would be a small blip in the architectural news cycle, something only industry geeks would care about. I had underestimated the scale. I hung up the phone. I did not say goodbye. I did not offer an explanation. Sloane continued to scream my name, but I tapped the red button and silenced her voice. I walked over to the drawer in my hallway console table. The wood stuck a little, swollen from the humidity, but I yanked it open. Inside, amidst a tangle of charging cables and loose change, sat a heavy iron key. It was old, tarnished, and looked completely out of place in a modern world. It was a master site key for the Blackwell Conservatory. I had kept it as a memento, a useless souvenir from a job well done. Or so I had thought. I picked up the key. The metal was cold against my palm. My parents had wanted a perfect night. They had curated every guest, every flower, every song to project an image of absolute perfection. They had excluded me to ensure that nothing would crack their polished veneer. I looked at the key, and then I looked at the reflection of myself in the hallway mirror. I was not the uninvited daughter anymore. I was the architect of their reality. Tonight, they did not just delete me from the guest list, they made a mistake far worse than that. By keeping me away, they had ensured that when the truth arrived, there would be no one there to protect them from it. They had not just rejected me. Tonight, they were being betrayed by the very party they had thrown to celebrate themselves. To understand why a mother would ask her daughter not to attend a family celebration, you have to understand the specific ecosystem of the Sanders household. In our house, affection was not a natural resource. It was a currency, traded exclusively for presentation. Growing up, I learned that existence was a performance art. The throw pillows had to be karate chopped in the center to look inviting but not used. The fruit in the bowl was wax because real fruit rotted, and rot was a sign of moral failure. My sister, Sloane, understood the assignment from the moment she could walk. She was the prototype of the perfect daughter. She had the blonde hair that caught the light just right in photographs, and she had the ability to speak for 5 minutes without actually saying anything controversial. She was an asset. When she married Graham, a man whose portfolio was as diversified as his personality was flat, my parents did not just celebrate a wedding, they celebrated a merger. Graham was the final accessory to complete Sloane's look. They fit together like two pieces of high-end furniture, uncomfortable to sit on but magnificent to look at. I was the other one. I was the draft that should have been discarded. While Sloane was practicing her smile in the mirror, I was in the backyard, taking apart the lawnmower to see how the pistons worked. I did not care about the surface. I cared about the mechanics. I wanted to know what held things up when the paint peeled away. My father, Elliot, found my interests personally offensive. He was a man who believed that success had a specific uniform, and it usually involved a suit and a tie. He would stand in the doorway of my room, watching me sketch architectural diagrams, and shake his head with a disappointment that felt heavier than anger. "Natalie," he would say, swirling the ice in his Scotch glass, "you have a sharp mind. You could do finance. You could do corporate law. Why do you insist on wasting your life on these old, dusty things? There is no future in fixing what is already broken." He did not understand. To him, an old building was just a liability waiting to be demolished. To me, it was a survivor. My mother, Lorraine, had a different way of handling my existence. She opted for strategic vagueness. I remember standing next to her at a charity gala when I was 26. A woman with pearls the size of golf balls asked what her daughters were doing. "Sloane is coordinating the silent auction." My mother beamed, touching Sloane's arm as if to verify her value. "She is doing a marvelous job." "And Natalie?" the woman asked, turning to me. My mother's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A glitch in the program. "Oh, Natalie is working. She does something with buildings." She said it with the same tone one might use to describe a pest control problem. She never said structural engineer. She never said historical preservationist. She never said that I was the one ensuring the roof over her head did not collapse during a heavy snowstorm. She reduced my career to manual labor because it did not sound elegant enough to be bragged about over champagne. The erasure was not always subtle. Sometimes it was literal. 4 years ago, we took a family portrait on the beach. We were all wearing matching white linen, a torture device my mother insisted upon. The wind was blowing. The lighting was perfect. And for once, I thought I looked decent. I was standing on the far left, next to my father. When the Christmas cards arrived in the mail 2 months later, I opened the envelope and stared at the card. It was a beautiful photo. Sloane looked radiant. Graham looked stoic. My parents looked like royalty, but the photo ended up on my father's shoulder. I had been cropped out. I called my mother, confused. I thought perhaps it was a printing error. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice breezy and unbothered. "The photographer said the composition was just much stronger as a square. With you on the edge, it looked a bit unbalanced. We figured you would not mind. You hate photos anyway." I did not hate photos. I hated being treated like visual clutter in my own life. That was the moment I stopped arguing. I realized then that fighting them was useless. When I tried to explain my feelings, they did not listen to understand me. They listened to find gaps in my argument so they could dismantle it. They treated emotions like a debate club. If I said I was hurt, they would provide 3 bullet points on why my feelings were irrational and statistically insignificant. So, I chose silence. I moved into my small apartment. I took on the hardest jobs at Northbridge Civic Studio. I worked 18-hour days in basements filled with asbestos and attics filled with bat guano. I did not tell them when I got promoted. I did not tell them when I won the state grant for heritage restoration. I learned that in the Sanders family. An achievement is not a source of pride for the individual. It is an asset for the collective. If I told them I had won an award, they would not be happy for me. They would be happy that they could tell their friends their daughter won an award. They would steal the joy, polish it until it was unrecognizable, and display it on their mantle. I refused to give them the fuel, but I did one thing that they did not know about. It was a habit born from years of being gaslit, years of being told that my version of reality was wrong. I kept everything. I kept every email. I saved every signed contract. I filed away every inspection report, every change order, and every receipt. My apartment was filled with filing cabinets, not because I was organized, but because I was terrified of being erased completely. In a family that constantly edited the narrative to suit their aesthetic, paper was my only anchor. It was my way of proving, if only to myself, that I was real, that I did things, that I mattered. I did not collect these documents for revenge. I did not organize them with the intention of bringing anyone down. I collected them because when you are the one who is always cropped out of the picture, you need proof that you were standing there in the first place. I sat in my apartment, staring at the old iron key in my hand. I thought about the file box under my bed, the one labeled Blackwell Project. It contained 3 years of my life. It contained the arguments I won, the disasters I averted, and the structural integrity reports that bore my signature and my seal. My parents thought they could edit me out tonight. They thought they could crop me out of the Blackwell Conservatory, just like they cropped me out of that beach photo. They assumed that because I was silent, I was absent. They forgot that while they were busy looking at the view, I was the one who built the window. And unlike a photograph, you cannot just trim the edges of a building without the whole thing coming down on top of you. 3 years ago, the Blackwell Conservatory was not the glittering jewel of the city that it is tonight, when the file first landed on my desk at Northbridge Civic Studio. The building was a death trap masquerading as a historic landmark. It was a century-old skeleton of iron and glass that had been neglected for the better part of 4 decades. The paint was peeling like dead skin. The foundation was sinking into the marshy soil, and the great glass dome, the very heart of the structure, was one heavy snowstorm away from collapsing into the main atrium. At Northbridge, we were the people you called when you wanted to save a building but did not care about being famous for it. We were the technical consultants, the preservationists, the ones who argued about grout composition and load-bearing ratios, while the starchitects drew pretty pictures on napkins. I liked it that way. I liked being in the engine room rather than on the bridge. It suited my personality, or perhaps it suited the personality my family had assigned to me. I was comfortable in the background, making sure things did not fall apart. The Blackwell project was massive. The budget was set at $25 million, a number that sounded high until you realized how much rot was hiding behind the Victorian facade. The timeline was aggressive. The city wanted it open in 18 months to coincide with the Centennial Festival. That meant 18 months of high pressure, sleepless nights, and constant warfare with the general contractors. The lead contractor was a man named Miller, who viewed historical preservation as an expensive nuisance. He wanted to do things fast, and he wanted to do them cheap. He saw a rotting beam and wanted to patch it with epoxy. I saw a rotting beam and wanted to trace the water intrusion, reinforce the footing, and replace the steel with a custom-fabricated replica that met modern seismic codes. Our battles were legendary. though they took place in dusty job trailers rather than boardrooms. The most dangerous moment came 6 months into the renovation. We were working on the main event hall, the exact room where my parents are currently holding their party. It was a vast, open space designed to hold 300 people. Supported by a complex system of trusses and iron columns, Miller called me down to the site on a Tuesday morning. It was raining, the kind of cold. Miserable rain that finds its way into your bones. He pointed to the subfloor of the main stage area. "We are behind schedule, Natalie," he said, shouting over the sound of a generator. "We do not have time to pull up these joists. They look fine. We are going to sand them down, treat them, and lay the new hardwood on top. It will save us $50,000 in 2 weeks." I knelt down. The wood looked dark, stained by decades of moisture. I took out my knife and jammed it into the timber. The blade sank in up to the handle with almost no resistance. It was not wood anymore. It was a sponge holding hands with a termite colony. I stood up and wiped the rot off my blade. "You cannot put a floor over this," I said, keeping my voice flat. It passed visual inspection. Miller argued, stepping into my personal space. "If we replace these, we have to shore up the entire north wall. That is a change order the client will not sign." I looked at him. I imagined the room filled with people. I imagined a wedding reception or a charity gala. I imagined the weight of 300 guests, plus tables, chairs, and a dance floor, pressing down on these rotted timbers. I did calculations in my head. The dynamic load of a dancing crowd is significantly higher than a static load. If this floor gave way, it would not be a slow sag. It would be a catastrophic failure. People would fall 12 feet into the concrete basement amidst splintered wood and twisted metal. "I am not signing off on this," I said. Miller's face turned red. "You are just a consultant. You do not make the schedule." I did not make the schedule. I agreed, but I do sign the certificate of occupancy, and until every single one of these joists is replaced with pressure-treated lumber and steel reinforcements, that building stays closed. You can explain the delay to the city council, or you can explain a mass casualty event to a judge. Pick one. He stormed off, kicking a bucket of bolts as he went. I stood there in the rain, shaking slightly, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline. It was lonely work. There was no applause for stopping a disaster that had not happened yet. There is no glory in prevention. For the next year, I lived inside that building. I inspected every weld. I climbed scaffolding that swayed in the wind to check the glazing on the skylights. I fought for the expensive fire suppression system. I insisted on the high-grade seismic bracing that cost 3 times as much as the standard option. I was the villain in every budget meeting. I was the annoying woman with the clipboard who would not let them cut corners. When the money started to run tight near the end, I stopped billing for my overtime. I spent my weekends on site, unpaid, supervising the installation of the chandeliers to ensure they were anchored into the new steel, not the old plaster. I did not do it for the client, and I certainly did not do it for Miller. I did it because the building deserved to stand. It had dignity, and I refused to let it be dangerous. When the Blackwell Conservatory finally opened, it was a triumph. The local newspapers ran full-page spreads with glossy photos of the restored atrium. The headlines praised the vision of the city council and the efficiency of the construction firm. There were quotes from the mayor, from the donors, and from Miller, who took credit for the historical accuracy of the renovation. My name was nowhere in the articles. Northbridge Civic Studio was mentioned in the fine print at the bottom, listed simply as technical consultants. I remember reading the coverage in my small kitchen, drinking coffee out of a chipped mug. I scanned the text for my name, a foolish, childish hope rising in my chest, only to squash it down when I reached the end of the page. It did not matter. I told myself the building was safe, the floor would hold, the roof would not leak, the trusses would not buckle. That was the job. The best structural engineering is invisible. If I do my job perfectly, no one notices I was ever there. They only notice me if the building falls down. I folded the newspaper and put it in the recycling bin. I did not need the recognition. I had the satisfaction of knowing that my fingerprints were on the skeleton of that place. Every hidden bolt, every reinforced joint, every safety calculation was a secret conversation between me and the structure. I never imagined, not in a million years, that my own parents would choose that specific venue to celebrate their own greatness. I never imagined that the floor I fought to replace would be the very floor they stood on to announce that I was not good enough to be there. They were dancing on my hard work. They were toasting their elite status under a roof that I ensured would not collapse on their heads. They were safe because of me. They were basking in the beauty of the architecture because I had refused to let it die. And they had absolutely no idea. Irony is not sharp like a knife. It is heavy like a lead weight. As I sat in my apartment, staring at the old key, the weight of it settled on my chest. I had saved the stage for their performance, and their opening act was to lock me out of the theater. They were trusting their lives and the lives of their precious, high-society friends to the competence of a daughter they were ashamed to acknowledge. I stood up and grabbed my coat. I was done being the invisible support beam. It was time for the engineer to walk out of the shadows and examine the structure one last time. The digital expulsion happened 4 hours before the first bottle of champagne was corked. I was in my kitchen, reviewing a set of load-bearing calculations for a new client. When my phone screen lit up, it was a notification from an app I had silenced years ago. You have been added to the Sanders family. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening not with excitement, but with the wary instinct of an animal sensing a trap. For 5 years, that group chat had been a sealed ecosystem where my mother posted photos of floral arrangements and my sister posted links to charity galas. I had been removed from it quietly after the incident, where I refused to wear a pastel bridesmaid dress for a vow renewal ceremony. Being added back now, on the day of the biggest event in their social calendar, felt ominous. The 3 dots of someone typing bubbled up immediately. Then, the message appeared. It was from my mother. Do not come. Only elites are invited. Please do not make things awkward. The cursor blinked. I waited for a follow-up. I waited for a, just kidding. Or perhaps a softening explanation like, we just think you would be bored, but there was nothing. The brutality of the sentence was the point. It was not a request. It was an eviction notice served before I had even stepped onto the property. I did not reply. I did not type out a furious paragraph about how much a taxi would cost, or how I had already bought a dress. Instead, I pressed the volume and power buttons on the side of my phone simultaneously. The camera shutter sound clicked. Screenshot saved. It was a reflex born of survival. When you grow up in a house where reality is constantly edited to fit the narrative, you learn to keep your own records. I knew that tomorrow, if I asked my mother about this, she would claim she never sent it, or that I had misinterpreted her tone, or that it was a joke I was too stiff to understand. But the screenshot was immutable. It was a fossil of the truth. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. The screen displayed a photo of Sloane, perfect and smiling, a photo she had chosen herself. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Sloane. I said, Natalie, honey? Her voice was high, breathless, and coated in a synthetic sweetness that set my teeth on edge. It was her performance voice, the one she used on waiters and donors. I just wanted to call and check in. Mom said she sent you a message. She did. I said, she was quite clear. Sloane sighed, a long, tragic sound that suggested she was the one bearing the burden of this situation. Listen, I tried to talk to them. I really did. I told Mom that maybe we could squeeze a chair in at the back, near the kitchen entrance. But you know how Dad gets about the seating chart? It is like a military operation. I leaned back against my counter. I knew for a fact that the Blackwell Conservatory main hall could seat 350 people comfortably. They had invited 150. There was room for an entire regiment of uninvited guests. It is fine. Sloane, I said, cutting through her lie. I do not want to sit by the kitchen. Right, exactly. She rushed on, relieved that I was not fighting. And honestly, Nat, this is not really your scene. It is going to be very stiff. Lots of speeches, lots of networking. You hate that stuff. You would just be standing in the corner looking miserable. And then Mom would get stressed, and it would just ruin the vibe. We are doing this for you, really, for me, I repeated flatly. Yes, so you can have a relaxing night in. Order a pizza, watch your true crime shows about serial killers. She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Then, the tone shifted. It became casual, too casual. So, anyway, how are you? Any big news? Mom was worried you might, I do not know, show up and announce something crazy just to get attention. You know how you get when you feel left out. I tightened my grip on the phone. This was the real reason for the call. She was fishing. She wanted to make sure I was not planning a scene, and more importantly, she wanted to confirm that my life was still pathetic enough to not threaten hers. I have no news. Sloan, I said, just work. Good. She breathed out. Good. Keep working hard. That is your thing. She hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling a cold knot of anger tighten in my stomach. She did not care if I was hurt. She only cared if I was going to be a problem. 20 minutes later, the second call came. This one was from my father. I answered on the first ring. Hello? Dad? Natalie? His voice was a low rumble, stripped of any pleasantries. He sounded like he was in a boardroom, finalizing a hostile takeover. I assume you got your mother's message. I did. Good. I want to emphasize the importance of discretion tonight. This guest list is not just friends and family. We have the mayor coming. We have investors from the city council. We have people who can make or break the next decade of my business. I understand. I said, do you? He paused. I do not want any surprises. I do not want you showing up in your work boots to drop off a gift. I do not want any dramatic social media posts about being excluded. We are curating an image tonight. Natalie, an image of excellence. I remained silent. He took my silence for submission. We have extremely high-profile guests, he continued, his voice dropping to a confidential reverence. Dr. Maren Wolf is attending, the head of the Heritage Foundation. She is notoriously difficult to impress. I need everything to be seamless. If she sees a family squabble, she will walk out. My hand froze on the countertop. The name hung in the air between us, heavy and impossible. Dr. Maren Wolf, Dad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Maren Wolf is coming? Yes, he snapped. Do you know who she is? She controls the preservation grants for the entire eastern seaboard. Having her there is a coup. She is the guest of honor. Effectively, that is why we cannot have any lower-tier distractions. He kept talking, listing other names. But I stopped listening. My mind was reeling. He had no idea. He truly, genuinely, had no idea. Dr. Maren Wolf was not just a name to me. She was the woman who had sat across from me in a dust-covered trailer 3 years ago, drinking lukewarm coffee while we debated the structural integrity of the Blackwell Dome. She was the one who had reviewed my load calculations. She was the one who had shaken my hand when I refused to let the contractor use cheap steel. She was the one who had sent me a handwritten note when the project was finished, telling me that my integrity had saved the building. My father was inviting the one person on earth who knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. And in the same breath, he was banning me from the room to protect his image. The irony was so sharp it felt like a physical blow. They were hosting a party to celebrate their status as elites. They were holding it in a building that stood because of my sweat and my stubbornness, and they were trying to impress a woman who respected me by hiding me away like a dirty secret. I understand. Dad, I said, my voice eerily calm. You want to impress Maren Wolf? Exactly, he said. So stay home. Do not embarrass us. He hung up. I stood in the silence of my apartment. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the floor. I looked at the screenshot of my mother's text again. Only elites are invited. They were building a monument to their own ego, but they had forgotten to check the foundation. They called me a shame. They called me a distraction. They thought they were protecting their perfect night from the stain of my mediocrity. But as I looked at the time, seeing that it was now 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I realized something terrifyingly simple. They were standing on a stage that I built, trying to impress a woman who knew my signature, while telling the world that I did not exist. They were not just ungrateful, they were walking blindly into a trap of their own making, and they had just ensured that the only person who could have warned them was locked on the outside. The sun had barely begun to dip below the horizon when my phone vibrated against the granite countertop. It was not a notification from the group chat this time, nor was it a demand from my immediate family. It was a text message from Aunt Janice, my father's older sister. Janice lived 3 states away and usually only communicated in the form of forwarded holiday chain messages or birthday emojis sent 2 days late. I picked up the phone, expecting a generic well-wish for the anniversary party. Instead, I read a message that made the blood drain from my face. She wrote, "I heard the news about your situation. I'm so sorry you are not doing well. Honey, we are all worried about you. Please take care of yourself." I stared at the words, my brow furrowing. My situation? I looked around my apartment. I was wearing a clean, oversized sweater. I had a cup of tea. I had just finished a successful week at work. My bills were paid. I was, by all quantifiable metrics, perfectly fine. I typed back immediately. Aunt Janice, I am confused. What situation? I am fine. 3 bubbles appeared and then vanished. She was typing, then deleting. Finally, a response came through. "Oh, your mother just said you were struggling again. She said you needed space to heal, and that is why you could not handle the pressure of the party tonight. Just know we love you, even if you are not stable right now. Not stable." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the counter. The phrase hung in the air like a toxic gas. They were not just telling people I was busy. They were not even telling people I was sick with the flu. They were painting a narrative of mental instability. They were weaponizing my silence to suggest I was having a breakdown. A cold fury, sharper and more dangerous than the hurt I had felt earlier, began to rise in my chest. I snatched the phone up and opened Facebook. I rarely use the platform, but I knew that is where the extended family ecosystem thrived. I went to my mother's profile. Her latest post was a photo of the Blackwell Conservatory, glowing in the early evening light, captioned, "A night of gratitude. So blessed to celebrate 40 years with my soulmate." I clicked on the comments. There were dozens of congratulations, hearts, and champagne bottle emojis, but then I saw it. A comment from a cousin. "It is a shame Natalie cannot be there," sending her prayers, and underneath that, a reply from one of my mother's bridge club friends. Such a heavy burden for a family to carry. Mental health is so important. I hope she gets the help she needs. My mother had liked the comment. I felt a wave of nausea. She had clicked the heart icon. She had validated a public declaration that I was a burden, that I was mentally ill, that I was something broken that needed fixing, by liking that comment. She had co-signed the lie. She was playing the role of the long-suffering, bubble mother who was protecting her fragile daughter, while simultaneously garnering sympathy for herself. It was brilliant, it was evil, and it was effective. If I showed up now, angry and shouting, I would just prove them right. I would look like the unstable woman they had described. If I stayed away, I confirmed their story that I was too fragile to attend. They had trapped me in a lose-lose scenario, or so they thought. I did not scream. I did not throw away my phone. I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I took a deep breath and engaged the part of my brain that I used for forensic structural analysis. When a building fails, you do not cry about the rubble. You document the fracture points. You collect the debris. You find the cause. I began to screenshot everything. I captured Aunt Janice's text. I captured the timestamp. I captured the Facebook comments. I captured my mother's love. I captured a tweet from my sister that read, "Sad to be missing one piece of the puzzle tonight, but self-care comes first." I created a folder on my desktop named Evidence. I dragged every file into it. I needed a timeline. I needed proof that while I was sitting at home working, they were actively dismantling my reputation to 150 of the most influential people in the city. Then, I stopped. My eyes drifted to the clock. It was 6:30. The guests would be arriving soon. My father had mentioned Dr. Maren Wolf. He had said she was the guest of honor. A thought struck me. My parents were lying to the guests about me, but were they lying to Maren Wolf? Or more dangerously, did Maren Wolf know something they did not? I picked up my phone again. My heart hammered against my ribs. Calling Maren Wolf on a Saturday night was a breach of professional etiquette. But I had to know. I had to know what version of reality was waiting at that party. I found her number in my contacts. We had exchanged numbers during the final inspection phase 3 years ago. I pressed the call. It rang 3 times. I was about to hang up, convinced she was already at the venue, when the line clicked open. Natalie? Maren's voice was warm, surprised, but distinct. Is everything all right? I forced my voice to be steady. I channeled the professional tone I used during safety briefings. Dr. Wolf, I am so sorry to disturb you on a weekend. I know you are likely heading into the event. Please, call me Maren, she said. And do not apologize. I am actually just pulling up to the venue now. It looks magnificent. Natalie, the exterior lighting you designed for the archway as well. It is perfect. Thank you, I said, gripping the edge of the table. I actually just wanted to check a timeline with you regarding the press release. I know the embargo lifts at 8, but I wanted to ensure there were no last-minute changes to the filing. It was a flimsy excuse. The filing was done weeks ago. There was a pause on the line. Natalie, the filing is set in stone, Maren said slowly. But surely that is not why you are calling me 20 minutes before the reception. I swallowed hard. I just wanted to be thorough. Maren was silent for a moment. I could hear the sound of a car door closing in the background. Natalie, she said, her voice dropping to a lower, more serious register. I am looking forward to seeing you tonight. When the Heritage Foundation decided to move forward with the announcement, I told the board that the only reason we were choosing the Blackwell site was because of the engineer who saved it. My chest tightened. She assumed I was coming. Of course she did. Why would the honoree not be at the event? There is a big announcement tonight. Natalie, Maren continued, I assume your parents have prepared a toast. It is a massive achievement. I hope they are bursting with pride. I closed my eyes. The image of my mother liking that comment flashed in my mind. The image of my father telling me not to embarrass them. They have other plans. I said, the words came out quiet, almost a whisper. The line went dead silent. The background noise of the parking lot seemed to fade away. Maren Wolf was a woman who navigated politics and high-stakes negotiations for a living. She did not need a diagram to understand what I was saying. Other plans, she repeated. The warmth drained from her voice, replaced by a sharp, metallic clarity. Yes, I said, I will not be there. Maren, I see. 2 words. But in those 2 words, I heard the gears turning. I heard the realization hitting her. She was about to walk into a room full of people who were celebrating a lie. Hosted by a couple who had erased the very person she was coming to honor. Natalie, Maren said, and her voice was different now. It was no longer the voice of a client. It was the voice of an ally. You need to know something. The press release about the project restoration is not the only announcement scheduled for tonight. I frowned. What do you mean? We held back a second press release. She said, it is scheduled to go live on the wire services at exactly 8:30. It concerns the new Historical Preservation Fellowship. I held my breath. That was the most prestigious grant in the country. It was a 5-year fully funded contract to oversee the restoration of federal landmarks. The board selected the recipient unanimously last week. Maren said, we are announcing it tonight because the recipient is local. The recipient is you. Natalie. The room spun. Me? Your parents do not know? She asked, and the question was rhetorical. She knew they did not know, if they knew. I would be the centerpiece of the party. I would be the trophy they were polishing. No, I whispered. They do not know. Maren let out a short, sharp breath. It sounded like she was steeling herself. Well, she said, that changes the complexion of the evening significantly. Maren. Do not worry. Natalie. She cut me off. I was coming tonight to celebrate a restoration. But it seems I have walked into a demolition site. Dr. Wolf. Stay by your phone, she commanded. And Natalie? Yes? If anyone asks you why you are not here, do not lie to them, not anymore. She ended the call. I sat there, the silence of the apartment deafening, a fellowship, a national fellowship, and my parents were currently telling the elite of the city that I was mentally unstable and unfit to be seen. I looked at the folder of evidence on my laptop screen. I looked at the old iron key on the table. The sadness was gone. The fear was gone. Maren Wolf was walking into that party with a grenade in her pocket, and she had just pulled the pin. My parents had spent 40 years building a glass house, and they had just invited the one woman who knew exactly where to throw the stone. I was not physically present when the doors of the Blackwell Conservatory swung open at 7 o'clock that evening, but thanks to the high-definition live stream my sister had insisted on setting up for her followers, I had a front-row seat to the circus. I sat in my darkened living room, the blue light of my laptop reflecting in my eyes, watching the event I was banned from attending unfold in real time. 150 guests flowed into the main atrium like a river of silk and expensive cologne. It was a curated crowd, a hand-picked selection of the city's financial bedrock and social climbers. The air was filled with the soft, indistinct chatter of people who were used to being listened to, layered over the sound of a string quartet playing a sanitized version of a pop song. It looked less like a family anniversary and more like a coronation. My mother, Lorraine, was stationed at the entrance. She looked like the queen of a small, wealthy nation. She wore a silver gown that shimmered under the ambient lighting that I had spent 3 weeks calibrating so it would not cast harsh shadows on the aging masonry. She greeted guests with a practiced warmth, her smile fixed and radiant, her eyes constantly darting over their shoulders to see if someone more important was walking in behind them. My father, Elliot, was working the room with the efficiency of a shark moving through a school of fish. He was not hugging people. He was closing deals. Every handshake was firm. Every clap on the back was calculated. I watched him corner a city councilman near the Champagne Tower, his body language expansive and dominant. He was likely talking about legacy, about stability, about the endurance of the Sanders name, all while standing on a floor that I had reinforced so it would not collapse under the weight of his ego. Then there was Sloane. My sister moved through the crowd not like a person, but like a mobile art installation. She glided from group to group, her laugh tinkling perfectly above the ambient noise. Trailing behind her was Graham, her husband, if Sloane was the star. Graham was the exhausted stagehand. He looked polite, holding her purse when she needed both hands to gesture, nodding at the right times. But his eyes were dead. He looked like a man who had read the script, realized he hated his character, but knew he could not break the contract. Through the live stream audio, I could hear snippets of conversation. The venue is simply breathtaking. Lorraine, a woman in a red velvet dress, gushed, gesturing up at the vaulted glass ceiling. The restoration is miraculous. Who was the architect? I need their number for my summer house in the Hamptons. I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat. This was the ceiling I had agonized over. This was the glass I had sourced from a specialty kiln in Germany to match the original Victorian clarity. My mother laughed, a dismissive, airy sound. Oh, you know how these city projects are. It was just a team the council hired, a local group. We were just happy they finished on time so we could host all of you. A local group. She swatted away 3 years of my blood and sweat as if it were a mild inconvenience she had graciously overcome. She did not even credit Northbridge. She definitely did not credit her daughter. She reduced the architectural marvel around her to a generic backdrop, a piece of scenery that existed solely to make her look good. I watched as guests leaned against the iron columns I had tested for stress fractures. I watched a waiter set a heavy tray on the balustrade I had fought to preserve rather than replace. They were touching my work, praising my work, and completely oblivious to the ghost in the machine. Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was subtle at first, A ripple in the crowd near the main archway. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. The camera operator, sensing the change, panned toward the door. Doctor, Maren Wolf had arrived. She did not make a grand entrance. She did not have an entourage. She walked in alone, wearing a sharp charcoal suit that cost more than my car. She carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that does not ask for attention because it already owns the room. She stopped at the edge of the atrium, her eyes scanning the space. She was not looking at the guests. She was looking at the building. She looked at the trusses. She looked at the joinery. She looked at the floor. She was checking my work. My mother spotted her instantly. It was like watching a predator lock onto a prize. Lorraine abandoned the couple she was talking to and practically glided across the floor to intercept Maren. "Doctor! Wolf!" My mother's voice rang out, pitched slightly higher than usual. "We are so honored you could make it. Truly, it means the world to us." Maren stopped scanning the room and looked at my mother. Her expression was polite but unreadable. "Mrs. Sanders, happy anniversary." "Thank you. Thank you," my mother gushed, reaching out to touch Maren's arm. A gesture of faux intimacy. "We are such admirers of the Heritage Foundation. Elliot was just saying how much we align with your vision for the city. We would love to discuss a potential seat on the advisory board next quarter." She was doing it. She was using the party, using the venue, using the moment to climb the ladder. Maren did not smile. She did not pull away. But she did not lean in. She stood perfectly still, a calm island in the sea of my mother's desperation. "The venue looks spectacular," Maren said. "The restoration is impeccable." My mother beamed, taking the compliment as if she had laid the bricks herself. "Oh, we adore it. It is the perfect setting for our milestone. We wanted something that represented history and class." Maren nodded slowly. Then, she asked the question. It was not loud. It was not aggressive. It was just a simple inquiry dropped into the conversation like a stone into a still pond. "And where is Natalie? I assumed I would see her standing next to the pillar she spent 6 months restoring." My mother's smile froze. It did not disappear, but it became rigid, like a mask that had suddenly hardened. The camera was close enough that I could see the panic flicker in her eyes. She had not expected this. She had expected Maren to be another socialite, another person who only cared about the surface. She had forgotten that Maren Wolf was an engineer first and a director second. "Oh, Natalie," my mother said, letting out a small, tragic sigh. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, unaware that the microphone on the nearby camera was picking up every word. "Poor dear. We wanted her here, of course, but she is not well." Maren tilted her head slightly. "Not well?" My mother nodded, looking suitably grave. "She has been struggling lately. The pressure, you know? She gets overwhelmed in crowds. We thought it was best for her mental health if she stayed home and rested. It is a private matter. Really, we are just trying to protect her." I sat in my apartment, my hands gripping the edge of the laptop. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. It was the same lie she had fed to Aunt Janice. It was the same lie she had fed to the bridge club. She was painting me as a fragile, broken thing that needed to be hidden away for my own good. Maren Wolf stared at my mother. She did not blink. She did not offer sympathy. She held the silence for 1 second, then 2, then 3. It was an excruciating pause. "Is that so?" Maren asked. Her voice was cool, devoid of the warmth she had shown me on the phone. "Yes," my mother said, regaining her confidence. "It is sad, but we are managing." Maren looked at her, and then she looked directly at the camera, as if she knew I was watching, as if she knew exactly who the audience for this next act was. "That is strange," Maren said, loud enough for the people standing nearby to hear. "Because I spoke to Natalie on the phone less than an hour ago. She sounded perfectly lucid to me. In fact, she sounded like the most competent person involved in this entire affair." My mother's face went pale. The smile cracked. Maren checked her watch. "A deliberate, tactical movement. Well," Maren continued, turning back to my mother with a smile that was sharp enough to cut glass. If she is resting, I suppose she will miss the announcements. That is a pity. I hate it when the guest of honor misses their own party. My mother blinked, confusion warring with fear. I do not understand. Guest of honor? Marin did not answer. She simply turned and walked away, heading toward the center of the room where the microphone stand was waiting. My mother stood there, frozen, the lie dying in her throat. On my screen, I watched the background of the party blur as the focus shifted to Marin's retreating back. The bomb had been planted, the fuse had been lit, and my mother, standing in her shimmering silver gown, had just heard the first ominous tick at 7:30 in the evening. The atmosphere in the Blackwell Conservatory shifted. It was not a physical change at first. The temperature did not drop, and the lights did not flicker. The change was digital, invisible, and devastatingly fast. It began with the soft ping of notifications. I watched on my laptop screen as a man standing near the hors d'oeuvre station pulled his phone from his pocket. He was a journalist for the City Chronicle, a man invited solely so my father could ensure favorable coverage of the event. I saw him glance at the screen, likely expecting a text from his editor or a sports score. He frowned. He tapped the screen, scrolling down. Then, he stopped. He looked up from his phone and stared at the massive iron archway that framed the stage. Then he looked back down at his phone. He turned to the woman standing next to him, tilted the screen toward her, and pointed at something. I knew exactly what he was showing her. At that precise moment, the embargo on the Northbridge Civic studio press release had lifted. Across the city, on news feeds, industry blogs, and social media timelines, a feature article had just gone live. The headline was bold and impossible to miss: "The Savior of Blackwell." But it was the header image that was the real weapon. It was a high-resolution photograph of me. I was standing in the very center of the Blackwell atrium, wearing my hard hat and safety vest, holding a roll of blueprints. The photo had been taken 6 months ago, during the final safety inspection. Behind me, in the photo, was the exact same marble staircase where my mother was currently standing, holding a glass of champagne. The visual parallel was undeniable. The woman in the photo was building the room. The woman in the room was pretending the builder did not exist, on the live stream. I saw the journalist whisper something to his companion. The woman's eyes widened. She pulled out her own phone. The ripple effect began. It was fascinating and terrifying to watch. It moved through the crowd like a contagion. One person checked their phone, whispered to a neighbor, and then the neighbor checked their phone. The polite, ambient chatter of the party began to change pitch. It went from the smooth, continuous hum of social pleasantries to a choppy staccato rhythm of confused murmurs. I could not hear every word through the microphone, but I could read the body language. I saw a man in a tuxedo type a query into a search bar. He was likely Googling my name. If he did, he would find the new article, which listed my credentials, my degrees, and the specific critical role I played in saving the structure they were standing in. He would also find the quote I gave the interviewer, a quote that was printed in bold text in the middle of the article. I learned early on that people can rewrite history, but they cannot rewrite physics. I let the building speak for me because the truth is in the foundation, not the brochure. The guests began to look around. They stopped admiring the floral arrangements. They stopped looking at the lighting. They started looking at the family. They looked at my father, Elliot, who was mid-laugh with a group of investors. They looked at my mother, Lorraine, who was still trying to recover from her encounter with Marin Wolfe. They looked at Sloane, who was posing for a selfie near the dessert table, and then the questions started. I saw the journalist approach my father. My father smiled, extending a hand, ever the gracious host. "Elliot," the journalist said, his voice carrying clearly over the audio feed. "I just saw the newswire. I did not realize your daughter was the lead engineer on this project." My father's smile did not vanish, but it became fixed, like a concrete setting too fast. He let out a dismissive little chuckle. "Oh, Well, Natalie dabbles, he said, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. She was part of a large team. You know how these press releases exaggerate things. The journalist did not smile back. Actually, the article is quite specific. It says she identified the structural failure in the subfloor. It says she is the reason the permit was not revoked. My father's hand, which was holding a crystal tumbler of scotch, tightened. I watched his knuckles turn white. He was losing control of the narrative. And for a man like Elliot Sanders, that was a fate worse than death. She is very talented, my father said, his voice tight. But tonight is about the family anniversary. We try to keep business separate. But if she is the one who restored this place, the journalist pressed, sensing blood in the water, why is she not here to take a bow? It seems odd to celebrate the venue without the person who saved it. My father took a sip of his drink. It was a long sip, a delaying tactic. He was searching for a lie that would fit. But the old lies, that I was sick, that I was unstable, that I was a disappointment, were suddenly incompatible with the reality glowing on everyone's screens. You cannot claim someone is a fragile failure while the New York Times architecture critic is retweeting their genius. Meanwhile, across the room, Sloane was facing her own reckoning. She had been checking her engagement metrics on Instagram when the comments started rolling in. I watched her face transform. The practiced, camera-ready smile dropped, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. She swiped at her screen frantically, likely deleting comments asking why she had lied about me. Graham, her husband, leaned over her shoulder. He looked at the screen, then he looked at Sloane. "You told me she was unemployed," Graham said. I could see his lips move clearly. "You told me she was borrowing money from your parents." Sloane hissed something back at him, grasping his arm. But Graham pulled away. It was a small movement, just an inch or two. But in a marriage built on appearances, it was a chasm. He looked at his wife, and for the first time, the adoration was gone. He looked at her like he was wondering what else she had fabricated. The question was no longer a whisper. It was becoming the dominant frequency of the room. "Where is Natalie?" I heard a woman near the camera ask it. If she is the engineer, why did Lorraine say she was sick? I heard a man answer, "Maybe she is not sick. Maybe they just did not want her here. Why hide her? Maybe they are jealous." The speculation was running wild. The curated image of the perfect, benevolent Sanders family was dissolving in real time. They had wanted to be the center of attention. And now they were, but they were not being viewed with admiration. They were being viewed with suspicion. My mother stood near the entrance, sensing the shift but unable to locate the source. She looked desperate. She tried to engage a couple in conversation, but they were distracted, glancing at their phones and then looking at her with a mix of curiosity and judgment. It was a slow-motion car crash. They were surrounded by 150 people, yet they looked completely isolated. The guests were physically present, drinking their wine and eating their food, but socially, they had already stepped back. They were reassessing the value of the Sanders brand. And through it all, the building stood silent and strong. The iron trusses held the roof. The floor held the weight of the crowd. The walls I had lovingly patched stood guard. I was not there, but I was everywhere. My absence had become a presence so large it was sucking the oxygen out of the room. My father turned away from the journalist, his face flushing a dark, angry red. He scanned the room, looking for someone to blame, looking for a way to shut it down. But you cannot shut down the truth once it has been uploaded. Then, I saw him lock eyes with Sloane. They shared a look of shared panic. They realized, in that moment, that the script had been burned. They were no longer the directors of this play. They were just characters who had forgotten their lines, standing on a stage that was rapidly turning against them, and the audience was waiting for the second act. The chaos in the room was not a loud explosion. It was a murmuring tide that threatened to drown my parents where they stood. They were trying to plug the leaks, smiling tightly at guests who were now holding their phones up like shields. But the narrative had already escaped their control. It was at this precise moment of social hemorrhaging that Dr. Maren Wolf decided to step into the spotlight. I watched on my screen as Marin walked toward the small stage that had been set up for the anniversary toasts. She did not rush. She moved with the deliberate, terrifying calm of a structural engineer inspecting a crack that she knew was about to become a fissure. She did not ask for permission to speak. She simply stepped up to the microphone, tapped it once, a sharp, electronic thud that echoed through the high ceilings, and waited. The room fell silent. It was not the respectful silence of a toast. It was the expectant silence of a courtroom awaiting a verdict. My father, Elliot, looked relieved for a split second. He likely thought Marin was stepping in to save them, to offer a distraction or a generic compliment that would reset the mood. He raised his glass to her, a gesture of desperate camaraderie. Marin did not return the gesture. She did not even look at him. She looked at the crowd. "Thank you," Marin said, her voice amplified and crystal clear. "I apologize for interrupting the festivities, but as I look around this magnificent atrium, I feel compelled to share a piece of history that seems to have been omitted from the evening program." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. 3 years ago, Marin continued, her tone conversational but heavy. The Heritage Foundation was preparing to condemn the Blackwell Conservatory. We had drafted the demolition order. The structural rot in the trusses was deemed irreversible. The funding had dried up. The contractors were advising us to cut our losses and sell the land to developers. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. My parents' friends looked around the pristine room, unable to reconcile the luxury they were standing in with the image of a wrecking ball. "It was not a team of consultants who saved this building," Marin said, her eyes locking onto my mother's face. "It was one person, one engineer who spent 400 nights inside these walls, one engineer who refused to sign off on cheap materials, one engineer who personally redesigned the load-bearing system that is currently keeping this roof from collapsing on our heads tonight." My mother, Lorraine, took a step forward, her mouth opening to say something, perhaps to interrupt, perhaps to claim credit. Marin did not let her. "That engineer is Natalie Sanders," Marin announced. The name landed like a gavel. Marin reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. She held it up for the room to see. It was stamped with the official seal of the Federal Department of Historic Preservation. "I came here tonight with a specific purpose," Marin said. "This is a letter of appointment. It names Natalie Sanders as the new senior director for the National Landmark Restoration Initiative. It is the highest honor in our field. It comes with a 5-year grant and the authority to oversee federal heritage sites across the country." She looked at the envelope, then back at the crowd. "I intended to hand this to Natalie personally. I intended to shake her hand and tell her that she is the future of American preservation." Marin turned her body slowly, pivoting until she was facing my parents directly. The camera angle shifted, framing Marin's sharp profile against my mother's crumbling composure. "But," Marin said, her voice dropping to a register that was dangerously soft, "I was told upon arrival that Natalie could not be here. I was told by her mother that she is unwell, that she is struggling with her mental health, that she is too fragile for a social gathering." The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the HVAC system over the live stream audio. "I find that incredibly strange," Marin said, "because I spoke to Natalie on the telephone yesterday. We discussed the tensile strength of the iron archway above the stage. We discussed the logistics of the press release. She was sharp. She was professional. She was completely fine. She let the contradictions sit there. She did not call my mother a liar. She simply laid 2 facts side by side, my mother's story and her own experience, and let the audience do the math. The result was devastating. I saw a woman in the front row cover her mouth. I saw the journalist from the City Chronicle typing furiously on his phone. My mother looked around the room, her eyes wide and wet, seeking an ally. But no one would meet her gaze. The lie of my illness, the safety net she had constructed to justify her cruelty, was not just torn, it was incinerated. But Marin was not finished. She had exposed the lie, but she had not yet revealed the sacrifice. There is one final detail. Maren said. She placed the envelope on the podium and leaned into the microphone. A project of this magnitude requires enormous capital. Toward the end of the second phase, the city grant money ran out. We were $50,000 short of the funds needed to restore the original mosaic floor you are all standing on. The city refused to issue more bonds. The contractors threatened to walk off the job. I sat up straight in my chair. My heart began to pound against my ribs. I knew what was coming. It was a secret I had kept even from Northbridge. We received a donation. Maren said, "It was anonymous." The donor wire transferred the exact amount needed to complete the project, $50,000. It came with only one condition, that the donor remain unnamed until the project was finished and certified safe for the public. Maren looked at my father. Elliot was staring at her, his face a mask of confusion. He knew about the donation. He had probably bragged to his friends that he had secured it through his connections. "The project is now finished," Maren said, "and the donor has given me permission to lift the anonymity tonight." She took a breath. The person who paid for this floor, the person who depleted their entire personal savings account to ensure this building would be beautiful enough for a night like this, is Natalie Sanders. The sound that came from the room was not a gasp. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the space. My father dropped his glass. It hit the floor and shattered, the sound ringing out like a gunshot. But no one moved to help him. They were too busy staring at him. "You see," Maren said, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage, "Natalie did not just build this stage for you. She bought it for you. She paid for the privilege of your celebration. And in return, you told the world she was too crazy to be invited." The camera panned across the faces of the guests. The look in their eyes had changed. 10 minutes ago. They looked at my parents with envy. They saw a power couple celebrating 40 years of success. Now, they looked at them with something far worse than hatred. They looked at them with revulsion. They looked at them like they were parasites who had fed on their own child. Sloane was standing near a pillar, her hand over her mouth. Graham had stepped away from her, creating a physical distance that spoke volumes. My mother was shaking, her silver dress catching the light as she trembled. My father looked small. For the first time in his life, Elliot Sanders looked small. Maren picked up the envelope from the podium. "I will be leaving now," she said. "I have an award to deliver to the only Sanders who deserves to be celebrated tonight." She stepped off the stage and walked through the center of the room. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. No one spoke. No one tried to stop her. The music had stopped. The conversation had died. The party was effectively over, not because the lights had gone out, but because the illusion had been shattered. I watched Maren walk toward the exit, her heels clicking on the mosaic tiles I had paid for. I looked at the frozen tableau of my family on the screen. They were standing in the ruins of their reputation, surrounded by luxury, yet completely and utterly destitute. My phone was vibrating so hard it was actually walking across the surface of my coffee table. The screen was a blur of incoming calls from unknown numbers, text messages from distant relatives, and frantic pings from the very people who were currently standing in the Blackwell Conservatory. I did not pick it up. I did not answer a single one. Panic is a structural flaw. It is a vibration that shakes the foundation until the cracks appear. I was done with panic. I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me, the same way the dust settles after a demolition. I stood up and walked to my bedroom. I did not put on a gown. I did not try to match the silver and gold aesthetic of the party. I put on a tailored black suit, the one I wore to site inspections when I needed the contractors to know I was not asking for permission. I put on my watch. I brushed my hair back. Then I walked to the hallway table and picked up the heavy iron key. It was not a key to the front door. It was the master key to the service entrance, the heavy steel door on the north side of the building that I had used every morning for 3 years. It was the door for the workers, the staff, the people who made the building function. It was the door I belonged to. I drove to the venue in silence. The city lights blurred past me, but my eyes were fixed on the road. When I pulled up to the service lane, the valet looked confused, but I did not stop. I parked my car in the loading zone, stepped out, and walked to the heavy steel door. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy clunk, a sound I knew better than my own father's voice. I stepped inside. The back hallway smelled of old brick and industrial cleaner. It was the smell of the building's bones. I walked past the catering staff who were frantically trying to plate desserts. They stopped and stared at me. But I kept moving. I pushed open the double doors that led to the main atrium. The noise hit me first. Or rather, the lack of it. The room was buzzing with a low, intense energy, like a hive that had just been kicked. The music had stopped. The guests were standing in clusters, whispering, holding their phones. I took a step onto the mosaic floor. My heel clicked against the tile. I reached out and ran my hand along the brass railing of the staircase. It was cold and solid. I remembered the day we installed it. I remembered arguing with the supplier about the alloy mixture. I remembered polishing it myself when the budget for cleaners ran out. A woman near the pillar turned and saw me. She grabbed her husband's arm. "That is her," she whispered. But in the silence, it sounded like a shout. "That is Natalie." The whisper traveled. Heads turned. The crowd parted. Not out of respect, but out of sheer, morbid curiosity. They wanted to see the ghost. They wanted to see the woman who had supposedly been too unstable to attend, walking in with a spine of steel. I saw my parents. They were standing near the stage, looking like shipwreck survivors clinging to a piece of debris. My mother's mascara was smudged. My father was holding a fresh drink, but his hand was shaking so badly the ice was rattling against the glass. I walked straight toward them. I did not rush. I did not look down. When I reached them, my mother let out a small, strangled sound. She took a half step forward, her hands fluttering up as if she intended to hug me, or perhaps to hush me. "Natalie," she breathed, her voice wobbling with a desperate attempt at maternal concern. "Oh, thank goodness. We were so worried. We thought—" I stopped her with a look. It was not a glare. It was a flat, neutral stare that refused to accept the performance. "I received your message," I said. My voice was calm, pitched low enough that she had to lean in, but clear enough for the people standing nearby to hear. "You said do not come. You said only elites were invited." My mother flinched as if I had slapped her. "Hush," she hissed, her eyes darting to the guests who were now closing in, forming a tight circle around us. "Not here. Natalie, please, we can talk about this at home. You are clearly upset. I am not upset." I said, "I am following instructions. You told everyone I was not well. You told them I was mentally unstable. I just wanted to come and let you know that I'm feeling much better now." My father stepped in, placing his heavy body between me and the crowd. His face was a mask of furious embarrassment. "Natalie, this is not the time to make a scene," he growled under his breath. "We have important people here. Do not ruin this." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had told me my career was a waste of time. Standing in the middle of my masterpiece, "I am not making a scene, Dad." I said, "I am just standing here. If my presence ruins your party, then the problem is not me. The problem is the story you told to keep me out. You did this on purpose." The voice came from my left. Sloane pushed through the crowd, her face blotchy and red. She looked less like a model and more like a frightened child. She pointed a manicured finger at my chest. "You knew," she accused, her voice rising to a shriek. "You knew that article was coming out tonight. You planned this. You wanted to humiliate us." I looked at my sister. I felt a pang of pity for her. She had spent her entire life trying to be the picture, and she had no idea how to exist outside the frame. "I do not control the news cycle. Sloane," I said, "and I do not control the Heritage Foundation. The only thing I controlled tonight was whether I stayed home and let you lie about me, or came here and stood in the truth." "But you ruined it," she cried. "You ruined everything." Graham, her husband, stepped up beside her. He did not touch her. He did not offer comfort. He looked at me, and then he looked at Sloane. His expression was one of dawn breaking over a dark landscape. He was finally seeing things clearly. Sloane, Graham said. His voice was quiet, but it stopped her cold. You told me Natalie was having episodes. You told me she was borrowing money from us. Sloane froze. Graham, not now. Is any of it true? Graham asked. He looked at the room, at the building, at the article on the phones of the guests. She built this place. Sloane, she just donated $50,000 to finish the floor. Was she borrowing money, or was that a lie too? Sloane opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at our parents for help, but they were too busy trying to save themselves. Before anyone could answer, a man in a tuxedo stepped forward from the circle of onlookers. I recognized him. He was the CEO of a major logistics firm, one of the top sponsors of the evening. Ms. Sanders? He said, extending a hand to me. I looked at him, surprised. Yes? He shook my hand firmly. I am David Ross. I just wanted to say it is an honor to meet you, and I owe you an apology. An apology? I asked. Yes, when your father asked for my sponsorship for this event. He showed me a list of honorary supporters to prove the family's commitment to the project. Your name was at the top of that list. He told me you were fully on board and managing the technical side as a family contribution. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I never saw that list. I said, Mr. Ross nodded slowly, his eyes hardening as he looked at my father. I suspected as much. It seems we were all sold a bill of goods. It is one thing to exclude a daughter. It is another thing to use her resume to solicit checks while you are doing it. My father seemed to shrink 3 inches. The air around him was practically vibrating with the judgment of his peers. He had not just been cruel, he had been fraudulent. He had used my professional reputation to secure money for a party he banned me from. I pulled my hand back from Mr. Ross and turned to face my parents one last time. They looked terrified. They were waiting for me to scream, to cry, to give them something they could dismiss as hysteria. I gave them nothing. I did not come here to destroy your night. I said, I did not come here to demand an apology, because I know you do not have one to give. I took a step back, creating a physical boundary between us. I came here to stop you. I said, I came here to stop you from using me as a prop in your play. I am not your failure to hide. I am not your tragedy to milk for sympathy, and I am certainly not your credential to cash in for sponsorship. I looked at the guests, then back at the people who raised me. You wanted the elites. I said, you have them. But from this moment on, you do not have me. I turned around. I did not wait for a response. There was nothing left to say. The building was standing strong. The truth was out. And for the first time in my life, I was walking away not because I was told to leave, but because I had finally outgrown the room. I had taken 3 steps toward the service exit when Marin Wolf's voice cut through the heavy atmosphere of the room. It was not a shout, but it carried the weight of authority that made everyone freeze. Wait, Natalie, she said. I stopped and turned back. Marin was walking toward me, holding the cream-colored envelope she had displayed on stage earlier. She did not look at my parents. She did not look at the stunned guests. Her eyes were locked solely on me. When she reached me, she extended the envelope with both hands, a formal gesture of respect that usually accompanied state ceremonies. This belongs to you, Marin said, her voice loud enough to reach the back of the atrium. It is the official appointment letter for the National Landmark Restoration Initiative. I reached out and took the envelope. The paper felt thick and expensive between my fingers. Thank you. Marin, I said softly. You do not need to thank me, she replied. You earned this. The board was unanimous. There is no one else we would trust with this responsibility. For a moment, there was total silence, and then someone started clapping. I looked over and saw David Ross, the sponsor who had shaken my hand moments ago. He was clapping slowly, deliberately. Then the journalist joined in. Then the woman who had whispered my name. Within 10 seconds, the sound grew from a trickle into a roar. It was not the polite, golf clap applause of a society event. It was a genuine, thunderous ovation. It was the sound of a room full of people acknowledging that they had witnessed something real amidst a night of artifice. My mother, Lorraine, looked at the applauding crowd with frantic, darting eyes. She saw the tide turning irrevocably against her, and her survival instinct kicked in. She stepped forward, forcing a trembling smile onto her face, and reached out as if to touch my shoulder. "We are just so proud of her," she announced, her voice pitching high and brittle. "We have always supported Natalie's ambitions. We knew she was destined for great things. Even when—" "Stop it, Lorraine." The voice came from the crowd. It was sharp and unforgiving. A woman stepped forward. It was my cousin, Sarah, the one who had written the comment about my mental health earlier. She looked furious, but not at me. "You told me she was having a breakdown," Sarah said, her voice shaking with anger. "You told the entire family that we needed to treat her with caution because she was unstable. You made me look like a fool for pitying her when she was actually outperforming all of us." My mother's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The fake narrative of the supportive parent had collided head-on with the reality of her own gossip. David Ross stepped in again, standing shoulder to shoulder with Marin. He looked at my father, who was now pale and sweating under the collar of his tuxedo. "Elliot," David said, his tone icy, "I want to be very clear. My firm sponsors families, not fictions. If Natalie does not personally validate every single claim you made in that proposal, I will be pulling my funding by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And I will be launching an internal investigation into who provided us with false background information regarding the key personnel on this project." My father looked at me. His eyes were pleading. He realized then that he had not just lost a party. He had lost his currency. He had traded his reputation for a night of glory, and the market had just crashed. He was looking at a financial and social deficit he could not talk his way out of. I looked past him to where Sloane was standing. She was gripping Graham's arm, but he was peeling her fingers off his sleeve, one by one. "Graham, please," Sloane whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It was just a misunderstanding." "It was not a misunderstanding," Graham said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "It was a production, and I am done being an extra in your show." He walked away from her, heading toward the bar not to get a drink, but to retrieve his coat. Sloane stood alone in the middle of the crowd, looking like a porcelain doll that had been dropped on concrete. The room was waiting for me to speak. They wanted a climax. They wanted me to scream at my parents, to throw the champagne in their faces, to give them the reality TV ending they were conditioned to expect. But I was not an actor. I was an engineer, and engineers do not destroy. We build, or we condemn. I looked at my parents. "I'm not going to ask you to apologize," I said, my voice steady, "because an apology requires you to understand what you did wrong, and I do not think you are capable of that." I raised the envelope slightly. "From this moment on," I said, addressing the room as much as them, "if anyone wants to know who Natalie Sanders is, ask me. Do not ask my parents. Do not ask my sister. Do not ask the stories they invented to make themselves feel taller." I turned to leave, but Marin cleared her throat. "One last thing," Marin said. She turned to the wall behind the stage, where a velvet curtain was covering a section of the masonry. As per the donor agreement, the plaque recognizing the primary benefactor of the Blackwell restoration was scheduled to be installed next week. Marin said, "However, given the confusion tonight, I authorized the team to mount a temporary display so everyone knows exactly whose house they are standing in." She gestured to a staff member, who pulled a cord. The velvet curtain fell away. Underneath, mounted directly into the center of the atrium wall at eye level, was a large brushed brass plaque. The lighting I had designed hit it perfectly, making the engraved letters glow. The Blackwell Conservatory restoration made possible by the generosity and vision of Natalie Sanders. It was in the center. It was permanent. It was undeniable. No matter how many parties they threw, no matter how many times they tried to crop me out of the photo, my name was burned into the very structure of the building. Every time they walked in here, every time they tried to show off this venue to their friends, they would have to look at my name. My father stared at the plaque. He looked like he had the wind knocked out of him. He realized that I had not just bought a floor, I had branded his stage. I did not wait for their reaction. I turned on my heel and walked toward the service door. I walked past the stunned guests who parted to let me through. I walked past Sloane, who was weeping silently. I walked past my mother, who was staring at the floor. I pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped out into the night air. It was cool and crisp. The sounds of the party, the murmurs, the shocked whispers, the clinking of glass, faded instantly as the door clicked shut behind me. I took a deep breath. It smelled of rain and asphalt, a stark contrast to the perfumed air inside. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel giddy. I felt light. I walked to my car, my heels clicking on the pavement. I did not look back at the glowing dome of the conservatory. I did not need to. I knew it would stand. I knew the trusses would hold. And I knew that for the first time in my life, I was not the support beam for someone else's happiness. I was the architect of my own. Epilogue. 3 weeks later. I was sitting in my new office at the Federal Preservation Bureau when my phone buzzed. It was a text message from my father. I stared at the name Elliot on the screen. It was the first time he had contacted me since the night of the party. The message was short, awkward, and typical of a man who had never learned the language of accountability. It read, "Heard you started a new job. Your mother and I were thinking of driving up to see the site. Maybe get dinner." I looked at the words. He was trying to sweep the wreckage under the rug. He wanted to pretend the explosion had never happened, to skip straight to the part where he could brag about his daughter. The federal director. He wanted access to the new project. He wanted back in. I typed my reply slowly. I did not delete it. I did not hesitate. I wrote, "The site is closed to the public, and as for dinner, that is not possible. When you are ready to meet your daughter as a human being, and not as a story you can edit to suit your needs, let me know. Until then, the door is locked." I pressed send, then I put the phone face down, picked up my pen, and went back to work. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed this journey of justice and self-worth. Please leave a comment down below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Natalie's decision. Do not forget to subscribe to the Lucy Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me. Stay strong, and see you in the next story.